Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Welcome back from spring break. We're going to go ahead here and hopefully you looked at the video I posted on Sunday. Hopefully you looked at that so you have an idea of what the changes are to our schedule as well as the AP updates. So you can go ahead and look at that. That's on Google Classroom. If you haven't looked at that yet, all right, take a second to go look at that so you know the updates. As you see here, we're going to get going on today's lesson, which is day 4 of Unit 6. So we'll pick back up. If you remember, Unit 6 was motivation, emotion, stress, and personality. So today we're going to jump in to personality with everyone's favorite discussion, which is Sigmund Freud. So we're going to talk about Freud, how he believes our personality develops. And then today is a good day. What you're going to do is you're going to take notes on this video, just on a piece of paper, or if you want to do it on Google Docs, you can do that. Take notes, turn that into Google Classroom, and then the other thing is your focus notes should get turned into Google Classroom as well. So here are the theories of personality. We have 4 theories. We're going to focus on psychodynamic, which is going to be today with Freud, and then briefly tomorrow we'll talk about Carl Jung and the Neo-Freudians, and then personality trait, humanistic, social cognitive, and we'll really focus on psychodynamic personality trait, as those are the 2 big ones, and then do a little bit of work with the other 2. So as I said, we're going to focus on psychoanalytic today, which eventually turns into psychodynamic. And it's the idea that people are viewed as struggling between their animal instincts and the pressures of socialization. So essentially, your innate instincts and then what's expected of you in society. So this would be a good thing to move that out of the way a little bit, copy this over into your notes as well would be a good idea. So Freud, we've alluded to him a lot, but we haven't talked about him. So this is going to be our first day getting into Freud. So he's referred to as the father of psychoanalysis. If you remember back to Unit 1, we talked about him. He's the father of psychoanalysis, which is this idea, right? Psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic psychology is this idea that your mind is an iceberg. So the image here represents the iceberg. And then your conscious mind, conscious being what you're aware of, is this very small tip of the iceberg. And then Freud believed you have the subconscious mind, and we'll talk specifically about what's in the subconscious mind today, according to Freud. But it's a reservoir of unconscious thoughts, wishes, and feelings. So it's this where all these unknown thoughts, feelings, or unconscious thoughts, feelings are that make up a part of our mind. What's going to make Freud unique is he believes that your subconscious mind is made up of sexual and aggressive urges. When we talk about neo-Freudians and psychodynamic tomorrow, they don't necessarily believe in the sexual aggressive part. And then one term to know with Freud as well is free association. So one thing we talk about here with personality as well is how do we measure personality? Free association is a big way that Freud used to measure or kind of assess people's personalities. And that was, if you remember, we did the Rorschach ink blot test in Unit 1 as well. That would be an example of free association. It's just this idea that if you freely talk and share your thoughts and what's going on in your mind, that eventually, if you do that enough, it'll kind of give some awareness into your subconscious, unconscious mind. So Freud believes your personality is made up of 3 parts. So essentially what we're going to talk about here is the components of personality and then how your personality develops according to Freud. So we have the id, the ego, and the superego. And your personality is going to be a result of these 3 structures conflicting with one another. So we'll talk about each one, and then you can see here in the image, these all make up your mind. So once again, if the iceberg is your mind, we're going to have parts of your mind that we're aware of, and then part of your mind, and actually the bigger part of your mind that we're unaware of. And you can see your mind is broken into the 3 parts: the id, the ego, and the superego, all of which are all three of them make up your mind and are in the unconscious, and then the superego and the ego are the only two that are in your conscious mind. So the id is the drive to satisfy basic sexual and aggressive needs. So once again, according to Freud. So this is kind of you think of it like your animal instincts here that are influencing your behavior. So your id is always going to focus on immediate gratification in terms of what do I want right now. So I always like to think about this as like a newborn baby is all id. And according to Freud, that would be true as well, right? The baby isn't thinking about how it's supposed to act or what it should be doing in this situation. It's just, if it's hungry, it cries. If it's sad, it cries. If it's happy, it smiles, right? So it's just these innate needs. It's not thinking about its actions. And I always said they're completely unconscious. The ego is going to be the second part that develops, and we'll talk about when that starts to develop according to Freud. The ego is the executive of the mind, so it's the decision maker, and it operates on what he calls the reality principle. And so this is where you start to realize that society puts restrictions on what you should and should not do, and sometimes your id is going against what society wants you to do, and your ego is going to kind of balance those and make a decision based off of what is acceptable. So this part is largely conscious because you are consciously making those decisions. So ego, think like executive, the decision maker. And then the super ego is going to be the conscious, which contains moral values, beliefs, and standards. So this develops later on in life when you've had time to kind of think about, the golden standard, treating other people the way you want to be treated. And it's the standards for judgments and future aspirations. And like I said, it's the last one to develop. Part of it's unconscious, part of it is conscious. And then the idea being when all three of these are developed, your id is going to be telling you one thing, your super ego is going to tell you another thing, and then the ego has to make the decision. So that goes, if you've ever seen this in cartoons or movies, anything like that, kind of what represents the three components here is this idea of you have the devil on one shoulder, the angel on another, and they're telling you what you should do in a situation, but then ultimately it's up to you to decide. So this is very much a good analogy for the three components. So you can think the id would be the devil, because typically the id is telling you to do this, do that right now, what you need. The example we'll look at here will be you're at a store and you like a sweater, but you don't have enough money to buy it, right? The id would be like, oh, just take it. No one will catch you. There's no cameras, things like that. Super ego would then be the angel, right? Because that's kind of your higher morals, your judgment, what you believe is right, what you believe is wrong. And then you yourself, or Homer in this situation, are the ego. So why don't you go ahead, stop the video for a couple of minutes, and then just kind of write out like an application to how Nadina here and how each component of the personality would play into her decision making. So I talked about the id. The id would probably tell her that she should steal the sweater, or maybe just put a bunch, buy it with a credit card that she might not have money for. But then think about what like this super ego would tell her to do, and then what the ego would tell her to do. So pause it, write down a couple of applications. And now, so what Freud would say, so say, for example, someone was in this situation and they took the sweater and stole it. Freud would say that person is like id dominant, right? They have a dominant id, so they're probably acting in ways that are very selfish and based off of like, just what do I need right now? Someone who has a strong super ego would say, no, stealing is wrong. I'll save up my money for it, kind of future aspirations part. And then the ego would just be the decision maker. So you can't really be ego dominant, because ultimately you're always going to have to make a decision using the ego. So now we're going to get in here real quick to Freud's personality development. So the id, the ego, and the superego, those three are his components of the personality. All right, so your personality is made up of those three. But then how your personality develops is going to move through stages here. And he's really going to put a focus on childhood experiences influencing personality development. So that's a big part of psychoanalytic psychology, is this idea of what happens to you when you're a child is going to have long-lasting impacts on you. So what's going to happen here is your id, right? Remember, that's looking for immediate rewards and pleasure. The id is going to focus pleasure-seeking energies on body areas that are sensitive to stimulation. And this is called the erogenous zone. So this, when people say Freud was a little out there, this is where he starts getting a little bit out there. And the conflict, there's going to be a conflict at each stage that's between the id and what the id wants and what they're actually allowed to do. And then he also comes up with this term fixation. So conflict not easily resolved or trauma during that stage causes an individual to lock on to that body area or stage. So we'll talk about fixations for each of the stage. So essentially we're going to have 5 stages here. At each stage, there's going to be this conflict between what the id wants and what society allows the child to do. And how they overcome that conflict is going to have negative or positive impacts on their personality. Now, forewarning, a lot of people think Freud was on LSD when he came up with this idea. And I think you'll see why. So the first stage here is referred to as the oral stage. And the reason it's called the oral stage is because pleasure is being focused on the mouth. So once again, remember, the id is in charge with directing energy towards a certain part of the body. And if you think about a little kid or a baby, right? Usually what does baby do? They suck on their thumb, they pick things up, put it in their mouth. So it kind of makes sense. Now the crisis here is going to be weaning from breastfeeding. Right, that is going to be the conflict, right? Because the baby just wants, the id is saying, this is where you get pleasure from, sucking on things, putting things in your mouth. And now the conflict is they're going to get weaned off of that because society says you shouldn't be breastfeeding for your whole life. So now the impacts on personality. So a successful experience with being weaned off of breastfeeding. And once, child experts will give different opinions on how that should happen. But if it's successful for that child, then the child will become trusting and easily able to be comforted. And remember, this is not just, for the child, but for the child and the rest of their life. So someone who's trusting or able to be comforted, according to Freud, is someone that had success at the oral stage. Now, if you fail, all right, so failure or just any kind of trauma, or maybe you were weaned off too early or too late, you may become dependent or clingy, which kind of goes along with the idea of trust issues, and then also orally aggressive. And when we talked about fixation, and this was probably the best examples of fixation come from the oral stage, people who have fixations on a certain stage, right, they kind of focus pleasure as adults on that specific area. So the fixation here, people who bite their nails, maybe they eat too much, or when they're stressed, they like to eat, they smoke, they drink. Those would be people who are fixated on the oral stage, because when they're stressed out, or they focus pleasure on that area. Stage two is now the anal stage, and once the age range here, it's just a general guideline. It's not like perfect, but just gives you a general guideline here. So this stage here is going to be 18 months, about a year and a half to 3 years. So the id is going to focus pleasure and the energy on bowel and bladder elimination. At this time, the ego is starting to develop. All right, so the child is starting to understand that society and the people that I'm surrounded with have expectations for me, and I'm supposed to act a certain way. So the crisis here is toilet training, which once again, you think about it, what's the biggest, kind of experience for a kid this age? They have to learn how to control their bladder and go to the bathroom in a socially appropriate way. So kind of makes sense. So impact on personality here. So success, and once again, success is going to vary depending on the kid, but really just do they develop the ability to go to the bathroom at an appropriate time? And is it kind of like a smooth process? So success would lead to someone who's competent, they can be productive, and they can also be creative. So those would be positive personality traits that come out of this stage. Now, if toilet training is too lax, so the parents are too lackadaisical with it, and maybe the child doesn't get toilet trained for a very long time, maybe they're not expected, all that stuff. This results in what Freud called an anal expulsive personality. So this is someone who's very untidy, right? So someone who's very disorganized and messy, but they're very generous as well. They give things away, maybe to the point where it's a fault. Now, if the parents are too harsh with toilet training, Freud believes that leads to an anal retentive personality, which is where they're like obsessively tidy. They're very well organized, but they may also be mean and stubborn because they're really set in their ways. Stage 3 is the phallic stage. Phallic stage happens here from 3 to 6 years. So now the pleasure is going to be focused on the penis. And one of the big criticisms with Freud was that he focused his theories solely on males. And as we're going to talk about tomorrow, there are some neo-Freudian psychodynamic psychologists that kind of take some of his ideas and apply it specifically to females. So the crisis here is going to be that the child is attracted to the opposite sex parent in a sexual way. Now, big thing to understand here is the id is completely unconscious. So it's not like the child is consciously thinking this, but it comes through in the child's behavior. So Freud referred to this as the Oedipus complex. So if you look here, right, the boy is going to be attracted to the mother. That's what we call the Oedipus complex. And as a result, he's going to be jealous of the dad. Freud's reasoning behind this was 3 to 6 is when the son finally is aware that he has male genitalia, and he's now jealous of his dad. And actually, an interesting part too with the Oedipus complex is some of that jealousy came from what Freud called castration anxiety, which, if you know, castration is removal of genitalia. So the son was essentially nervous that the dad was going to castrate him. Once again, unconscious, but Freud's also possibly on LSD when he's coming up with these ideas. And then Karen Horney is going to be a neo-Freudian we talk about. She's going to propose the Electra complex, which is essentially the same thing, just with the daughter now. So the daughter's attracted to the dad, jealous of the mother. Freud disagreed with this. He actually claimed that females have penis envy. So now, impacts on personality here of the phallic stage. So if there's success in overcoming this attraction, so if we think about the Oedipus complex, right? So if the son overcomes this attraction and jealousy of the dad, the son is going to identify with that same-sex parent. And when they say identify, or Freud says identification, it means they take on the same traits as that same-sex parent. The idea being the son is like, oh, well, dad must have done something right to marry and have a child with mom, so I should be like my dad is kind of the idea there. Now, any kind of failure here, and usually Freud said failure was a result of some sort of abnormal family structure. So maybe there wasn't a dad, there wasn't a mom, they separated, something of that nature. Failure would lead to being arrogant, sexually inferior, feeling sexually inferior, inadequacy, or also envy as well. So after that, probably the most interesting of the stages, Freud says is the latency stage. So this is from 6 to puberty. Now, sexual feelings are dormant as the ego and superego are really starting to develop. So the child is now, and you think about this, the child is in school, they're starting to develop hobbies, hanging out with same-sex friends. So the child focuses their energy now towards schoolwork, hobbies, and friendships. I like to. This is like the EU cootie stage, right? So they're not really worried about opposite sex and sexual feelings that they have. So the last one here, so this would be stage 5, is the genital stage. So this would be puberty plus. Now the crisis here is finding meaningful heterosexual relationship. And Freud believed that a healthy relationship as an adult was heterosexual. And he believed homosexuality was a negative personality trait that came out of failure at previous stages. He never said specifically what stage, but that was his take on it. And that's one of the big reasons, too, why Freud's psychosexual theory is no longer really accepted, is because of, he was very homophobic and believed that homosexual relationships were unhealthy, which is not a belief today. So if you've been successful at the previous 4 stages, Freud would say you have a personality, a strong personality with positive character or traits, and that now you can have a healthy relationship, you can get married, and then you can have children. And then if you have fixations or failures at those other stages, it's going to cause unhealthy relationships in some way. So there you go. That's Freud. Like I said, interesting stuff. Unique guy, that's for sure. So like I said, you should go to the next page here. You should have been taking notes there. All right. So take a picture of your notes, put it on Google Classroom. The assignment box is up there. And then also you should turn in your focus notes to Google Classroom as well, at least by the end of the day. I have it set for 11:59 p.m. Your next focus notes is going to be due the end of the day on Thursday, and you just have 4 sections to do there, and we'll still do the vocab check on Friday. So first, make sure you took notes, turn those into Google Classroom. Then if you have to finish up your focus notes, go ahead and do that. Obviously, if you have any questions about changes to the schedules or assignments, you also have time. If something's not right with your term 3 grade, we can get that taken care of still until the end of this week. So be sending me emails, or even if you just want to say hi, check in, see how things are going. I don't have much going on here. Social distancing. Make sure we're all back together in school at some point here.